growing up as an Englishman, the Kentucky Derby was not high on my list of races to win. Most people that get into training, they want to win the Kentucky Derby. Honestly, I almost think it's an unfair goal to set yourself because it's just so difficult to win the Derby. So many things have to align for that to happen.
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for tuning in to another episode of the Off the Track Podcast, a daily racing forum interview series where we go beyond the past performances and the handicapping. This week, we had trainer Graham Motion join us, and we were very lucky that Graham had some time to spend with us talking about his amazing career, winning the Kentucky Derby and the Dubai World Cup with Animal Kingdom, the Breeders' Cup success he's had with some of those great horses on the grass. We get into all of them. We got a chance to talk with Graham what it was like growing up, how he got involved in horse racing, some of the early days of training, and how he's been able to maintain that success through the years. Kick back and enjoy this conversation with trainer Graham Motion. We are very lucky to have Kentucky Derby winning trainer, Dubai World Cup winning trainer, a man who's won some of the biggest races in the world, trainer Graham Motion, here to speak with us. Graham, how's everything going on your end?
Everything's great. Thanks for having me.
So wanted to go through some of the great horses that you've had throughout your career, but want to talk about a couple of the really nice ones that you have right now. I'm a big fan of Laurelyn, who just shows up each and every time with a fantastic effort. She wins her first 5 starts, and in her last 2, it's not like she ran poorly. She was second in the Grade 1 QE2. She was second behind a very nice horse named Fion last time out. How's she doing? And, did you know all along with a horse like that she was going to be good when she starts her career off with such success?
Yeah, so she came to me a little differently because she actually started her career. She was born at Goffs in Ireland. She started her career with Jamie Osborne in Lambourne. He kind of prepped her, got her ready as a 2-year-old. He broke her. And I already got vibes from Jamie that he quite liked her because he didn't really want her to come to me. So So he had already told me that he liked her quite a bit when she came over, and she really didn't do anything wrong, from the minute we got her. So, I don't think we were overly surprised when she won first time out, although we never necessarily expect them to win first time out. But, we already thought she had talent.
Do you have any plans for her, or what might be next for her coming off that runner-up effort in the Jockey Club Oaks?
Yeah, I thought she ran well the other day. Fion finished behind us the time before. She got the better of us this time. I thought Flavian gave her a great ride. She kind of tracked us and just kind of had our number. My thoughts were that was going to be her last race of the year. It always was. So she's already actually getting turned out in a proper paddock at home, and she'll stay at Fairhill, through December, and then probably start back up with my other turf horses in January.
We'll be keeping an eye out for her next year. A horse who you've had really good success with this year, a 3-year-old Grade 1 winner. He's been in all the big races for his division from April on, is Test Score. Talk to us a little bit about him. We got his big win in the Belmont Derby earlier this year, but I've just been so impressed with how he's always in the biggest races and he just always shows up.
Yeah, he hasn't done much wrong all year, to be honest. So we took him to Del Mar. I was worried about shortening him up to a mile in the Bryan Station at Keeneland. I didn't think that was ideal. The 1.8 at Santa Anita just seemed like it really suited him. So after he ran so well there, we kept him at Del Mar so we can run him back in the Hollywood Derby next weekend.
We were talking before we started recording. We got to get you some luck with the weather here in Del Mar, where we're not used to the rain. It's been a little rainy the last couple weeks. Because I was thinking about this, watching some of your horses and doing the research here. I was like, it feels like you've had some really good success in Southern California over the last year or so. In graded stakes races in California, at Santa Anita and Del Mar, 5 for the last 11, with 8 top 3 finishes. So you're winning at a 45% clip. Is that something that you've kind of taken a notice, or you seem like you have a good kind of grasp or feel for the races? It just had a lot of success sending horses out here in the last year or so.
Yeah, look, we've always had our eyes on California. I love going to Santa Anita and Del Mar. Santa Anita is one of my most favorite tracks. But besides that, it really does help when you get away from Chad. Joking aside, he's so dominant in these, especially in the filly races, of which I always have a lot of turf fillies, and he dominates that division. So you can get away from Chad, you get away from Bill Martin and Todd and some of those guys, and it definitely thins the competition out a little bit. And also the program just really suits us. You're going to get a good turf course. You don't have to worry about the weather so much, although we have obviously the last couple of weeks. But it just makes sense. And really, for us to take a horse to California and put it on a FedEx out of Newark, it's almost just as easy as sending a horse to Kentucky, really.
Let's go back to the very beginning, Graham, and let's talk about how you initially get interested in horse racing. As a kid, what were the things that drove you into horse racing? Who kind of influenced you and got you interested?
Yeah, I mean, look, my mom and dad, I grew up with horse racing. My mom was actually one of the first women on the backstretch in New York. My parents moved twice across the Atlantic. It's kind of a crazy story. So my mom was very involved in steeplechasing in this country. Back when steeplechasers were stabled at the racetrack. And she was doing it when there really weren't many women around. She actually tells me a story of how she used to see Funny Fitzgibbons at the track at Saratoga when she was going on to the track at Oklahoma. So, look, it was very much in my roots. I was possessed about horse racing when I was younger. Back then, you could only see racing on TV on the weekends. Like, that was a big deal on a Saturday to be able to watch horse racing, right? I always had the idea I wanted to be a jockey. I very quickly knew I was going to be too tall and probably not brave enough to do that, to be honest. But I did actually win one race at a point-to-point meet. But no, it was in my blood. I think it was in the blood from my parents, and it was something that I was always just fascinated in. And I grew up, from a trainer's point of view, I watched Henry Cecil saddling horses at Newmarket, and I idolized Lester Piggott and Steve Coulson back in those days.
Initially, you were thinking about being a rider, and then I was reading that you worked over on a stud farm in France before you sort of got your way into training.
Yeah, I actually worked on a stud farm called Luminy in France back when I was still living in England. And Francois Boutin, he actually worked there when he was obviously much younger. So there were quite a few trainers that have come through that program. And then after I worked for Jonathan Shepherd for 5 years after I left high school, I always say Jonathan Shepherd's was kind of my college, really. I went to work for Jonathan Pease in Chantilly, and that's where I met my wife, who was working for Alain Roy-Dupré.
Your biggest win of all, right?
100%.
Then you come back to the U.S. and you're trying to become a trainer. You're able to become an assistant trainer working for Bernard Bon. Is that correct?
That's right. I actually came back from France with Steve Moyer, who trained for a long time back in those days. And we came back to Bowie together. And one day I heard of an opening at Bernie Bonds, and I ran over and managed to get the job working for Bernie, which was a huge change from working for Jonathan Shepherd and spending a year in Europe. I went to Pimlico to work for Bernie, who always won the first 2-year-old race every year in Maryland. So it was probably the best thing I ever could have done. It was a bit of a culture shock, but Bernie was very good to me. It was an amazing experience.
From a learning perspective, that's probably about as opposite end of the spectrum as what you were learning the other way, right? Long distance on the turf, and here you're dealing 100%. With short dirt sprints. That probably helped you when you're able to learn from someone who does it this way and then the complete opposite way. You probably needed that before you came back into American racing.
100%. It just was so good for me. I didn't even know how to use a stopwatch when I went to work for Bernie. We trained in the fields working for Jonathan, and then I went to clocking 2-year-olds 3 furlongs at Pimlico. It was the best experience I could have ever had.
So when you are taking over and you're becoming a trainer yourself, who are some of the owners early on that were throwing you a bone? That's one of the struggles with a young trainer or a new trainer, getting some of the owners and getting some of that support. Who were some of the early owners that gave you that support?
Yeah, so when Bernie retired very suddenly, he had 3 main owners, and one was a Gertrude and Skip Leviton, who owned all the horses that came with the name Gala. I don't know, many people won't remember that, but back in Maryland, that was a really big deal. There was a horse called Gala Spinaway that Bernie was training at the time. Skip Leviton, Eugene Ford, and Tom Bayliss were his three owners, and they all said they would stick with me when I started to go out on my own. One of the conditions was that I moved from Pimlico to Laurel, which I was very happy to do. And actually, the day I moved to Laurel was the day that Bernie passed away, which I always thought was it was very odd. It was almost like a passing of the torch. But I was incredibly lucky. There were three very kind people. Mr. Leviton gave me a check for $10,000 so I could meet my first payroll. You don't come across people much like that anymore.
You mentioned Gala Spinway. That was one of the first horses that really put you on the map too, right? Was that your first graded stakes win?
Yeah, he really was. I mean, he was actually injured when I went out on my own, and my wife would go over to Glade Valley Farm and get on him every day. He was just coming back from an injury. So yes, he was, to start off with a horse like that was such a huge help to me, because once people saw you were capable of winning those kind of races, it gave them the confidence to send you horses. So he was an incredibly influential horse for me.
When you become a trainer, it's more than just dealing with the horses, right? You're having to deal with the owners, talk and be a people person. You're also having to deal with finances and bills. Those are things that are much different than working with horses and training horses in the morning. What were some of the challenges or maybe things that were different or hard for you right off the bat when you were starting out, small operation?
Yeah, I was very lucky because, I came with these owners who were very used to the ups and downs.
Yep.
They wanted to give me a chance. But then, the big process was growing from there. And I will say that Mr. Albritton, Lazy Lane Farm, they started sending me some of Frankie Brothers' second stringers. And Frankie was a huge help to me because he would say to me, Graham, you should run this horse for $25,000. Don't worry, just do it, and kind of give me the confidence. And you needed that. It's a big deal to make those decisions when you're starting off. And as far as the running of the operation, I mean, my wife took that burden. She's self-taught. She took over the payroll. She took over the billing, and that's so important because most of us that get into this, we don't have that background. And I would highly recommend to anybody that wants to get into it to get some kind of a business background, because that can be so helpful to you, because you have to, you're dealing with money. A lot of money comes in, but a lot of money goes out to run a training operation.
Then we start getting into some of the real great horses that really put you on the map too. Better Talk Now, who wins the Breeders' Cup Turf, runs in the Breeders' Cup 5 different times, is second in a grade 1 at 10 years old. Let's talk a little bit about him and what he meant to you and your barn, your family overall. Such a cool horse.
Yeah, I mean, he was my first Breeders' Cup runner, and I've been back every year since, which is phenomenal. I mean, I do wonder if he would ever be a horse that would be considered to go in the Hall of Fame, because really what he did was pretty remarkable. I mean, he won every major grade 1 in New York. He ran till he was 9 years old. He was an extraordinary horse for that era. And yes, I mean, when he won the Breeders' Cup, which was both my first Breeders' Cup win and Ramon Dominguez's first Breeders' Cup win, that definitely put me to another level. A lot of European owners started sending us horses, and that really helped my career to take off, if you like.
And now when we see the shelf life of so many good horses, that's 5 starts, a year, maybe 2 years. Looking back on what he did and just looking at his past performances, it's pretty remarkable that you can have a horse that stays so sound and just so sharp for so many years.
Yeah, he was phenomenal. And he was a tricky horse. It was quite a team effort. I had 2 really good girls that worked for me, Lisa Davidson and Fenella Flynn, who galloped him. He was not an easy horse to get on in the morning. And look, we traveled to Japan, we traveled to Dubai with the owners, Brent and Carol Johnson. It really was a great time for us as a family, and the things that he enabled us to do were extraordinary.
You were talking about him being tricky. Was it kind of like he looked on paper? Was he a horse that just didn't have a lot of early speed and you had to get into him and work in the mornings? Like, what was his demeanor like?
No, he was tough in the morning, so it was a matter of sort of keeping him controlled in the morning, and then obviously, in the afternoon things really had to set up for him, and that's why we ended up getting Shake the Bank to help us, as a rabbit to make sure there was some pace in the race. Credit to Ramon, he figured him out so well. I think one of the only times I ever got upset with Ramon and Steve Rushing, his agent, was when they didn't go to Arlington to ride him in the Arlington Million, because he was just not a horse that anybody could just get on and know how to ride him. He was not an easy horse. And Ramon just had this incredible patience with him. He knew when to pull the trigger, and it really was sort of the last minute. And it had to be timed right because he had a very short run.
Horse who was brilliantly talented and a little bit unlucky in some of the big ones was Filmmaker, and another horse who had some real longevity. I think he went to 3 different Breeders' Cup races, hits the board in all of those, and run at the top level for a couple years in a row. What could you tell us, and what do you remember about Filmmaker?
Yeah, I mean, Ouija board was her nemesis. We finished behind her 3 years in a row in the Breeders' Cup. She also went to that first Breeders' Cup at Lone Star with us with Better Talk Now, and I remember being so disappointed when she came in second, and Johnny was sort of like, why are you disappointed? She ran amazing, but it was, I never imagined I would have won a race later on the card with Better Talk Now. But she was amazing, filly. She was very consistent. She was a very special filly for us. Won my first Grade 1 at Keeneland in the Queen Elizabeth.
The big horses and the big wins continue on for you. Horse named Shared Account is one that really shocks people at 46-1, winning the Breeders' Cup filly in Mare Turf. Probably one of the bigger prices that you've had, but you have to be in the biggest race to win the biggest races. What do you remember kind of going into that race thinking about your chances?
Yeah, beating Henry Cecil, who was kind of my idol,
How cool is that?
That was it was really a pinch me moment. She had run disappointingly. I think it was in the Flower Bowl at Belmont. Things just didn't work out. I remember Kevin Plank from Sagamore was so disappointed that day. But we kind of just decided we had to put a line through it. And again, we got a great ride from Edgar that day at Churchill. She was a really good filly, and that's been such an important family for me since then. We've had so many of her siblings who have gone on to great things.
When you have Sharing come back and win the Breeders' Cup, does it make you feel a little bit old that you had the mom and now you have Sharing come back?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, that's what I mean. That family's been so influential for me, and I'm still, Sparkle Blue is another sibling who's been pretty consistent the last couple of years. And now I'm training, the offspring of those guys, Sharing's offspring. So I am old. There's no doubt about
that. Well, we get to one of the big ones for you, Animal Kingdom, who you take over the training of Animal Kingdom after he just broke his maiden. He'd run a couple times. What do you remember when you first got him, when you first laid eyes on him in some of those early races?
Yeah, so I just started training privately for Barry Owen for Team Valor. And with that came a horse called Pluck, who had just won the Breeders' Cup for Todd. He was one of the first horses to walk into my barn. And I was thinking how incredible it was that my first month training for Team Valor, I had this horse that had just won the Breeders' Cup. But when we got to Florida, I started working. Animal Kingdom came to me in Florida that winter. He'd been with Wayne Catalano, obviously, earlier on in his career. But when I started working him in Florida, he was out working Pluck. And I would say to Barry, Pluck's a good horse, but this horse he's outworking him. So immediately we were pretty excited about him. Could I have told you he was going to win the Kentucky Derby in March or, even April for that matter? No way. But he was obviously a horse who was impressive in the morning.
And you go into the Kentucky Derby. What were you thinking about his chances on dirt at that point? Because we hadn't seen him run on the dirt, but you trained him on the dirt in the mornings. And there's this one work that gets talked about that he had prior to the Kentucky Derby, where I think a lot of people went, wow, it does look like he can run on the dirt.
Yeah, one time. I mean, he only worked on the dirt one time. We kept waiting every weekend for it to stop raining, and I kept breezing him at Keeneland on the synthetic. And then finally, the last weekend, we had a window to breeze him on the dirt, so we got him over to Churchill. And I remember, like you say, there was a lot of buzz about it. I remember Baffert made the comment to somebody he was the horse to beat. So of course, that got my attention.
You win that race. First, going into the race, as a trainer who had a lot of turf horses and really good grass horses, did you ever even think about winning the Kentucky Derby? Was that even like a dream of yours?
No, I almost feel guilty about this because growing up as an Englishman, the Kentucky Derby was not high on my list of races to win. Most people that get into training, they want to win the Kentucky Derby. Honestly, I almost think it's an unfair goal to set yourself because it's just so difficult to win the Derby. So many things have to align for that to happen, right? So no, I had never even dreamt of winning the Kentucky Derby. I had a couple of other runners, and everybody told me what an amazing experience it was, and I did not have great experiences in the Kentucky Derby. I had Chilito, who was a very difficult horse. He actually pulled himself up in a workout. Somebody said it was the strangest thing they'd ever seen in Kentucky Derby history when I had to come back and work him the next day. So I'd had a couple of horses that I didn't have great experiences with, but I had no expectations of winning the Derby. And, Barry and I put this plan together that after he won at Turfway, that we would, if we could get him on the dirt and he worked well, we would take a shot.
In the Kentucky Derby and the Triple Crown is the time of the year when horse racing really is in the spotlight nationally and worldwide. What was that like, that whirlwind, like after you win the race, those couple weeks leading into the Preakness? I mean, interviews, you're getting asked to go all over the place. What was that like after you won the big one?
Crazy. I mean, it was not something you can prepare yourself for that 2 weeks. After you get beat in the Preakness, things go very quiet. But one of my kids, the headmaster at one of my kids' schools, said that was the best excuse they'd ever had for a child not to come to school the next day, that they'd won the Kentucky Derby the day before. So
and it was a reason, not an excuse, right? It was true.
Yeah, it was amazing, But the one thing about the Derby is, as soon as you cross the wire, everybody wants to know if you're going to run in the Preakness, and that was not something that I certainly had even thought about. I'd always thought I'd followed horses that people had run in the Derby, and I was always intrigued by how they breezed them. Whether they breezed them after the Derby to get to the Preakness. And I'd always thought about it in my mind, what I would do. But, you don't really know until you're in that position how you're going to handle it or how the horse is going to handle it.
So he ends up running second in the Preakness, comes back in the Belmont, and sloppy racetrack that day, doesn't really fire his shot. But what was so great is that for so many horses in this era, that's it for them. That's their career. We don't even get a chance to see them come back as an older horse. We don't get a chance to see them run against, better horses or, in some big races. And that was not the case with him. We got a chance to see him come back in 2012 and set himself up to run in the Breeders' Cup Mile and then in the Dubai World Cup. I mean, there are so few horses out there, Graham, that are that good on so many different surfaces too, right? Synthetic, turf, and on the dirt. It's amazing.
Yeah, he was a very unusual horse. I mean, he was an incredibly talented horse. And I mean, how many people, after he was injured in the Belmont and, the next year we talked about going to, I get the years a little bit muddled, but we talked about going to Dubai the next year, but he was injured in the prep or right after the prep race. But his race,
he ran in February, right there
so
at Gulfstream, and then that's when he didn't run for a while.
He came out of that race sore, and was that the year that he ran in the Breeders' Cup Mile?
Yeah, and then he ran in the mile off the long layoff.
So, I mean, how many people would even let you run how many owners would let you run the Breeders' Cup off of a layoff? I believe it was from February, right?
Yep.
Barry was the only one crazy enough to let me do that. And the horse, I mean, if you watch that race again, he was so unlucky. He got absolutely stopped down the backside. He didn't. I think Rafael Bejarano rode him. He didn't get out till the 16th pole. Maybe I'm exaggerating. Might have been the 8th pole.
It was a brutal trip.
But Wise Dan was gone, and we just couldn't get to him. But he ran a winning race. I mean, he was so unlucky that day. That was probably one of the toughest losses we've had. And then we got him back to Dubai, which was, I always felt like the Derby was a little lucky because he was just that good a horse that he kind of took me there. But Dubai was 2 years planning to get him to that race. So that was very strategic. And I'll never forget once we got to Dubai, the horse was just so on his toes, and I was kind of on pins and needles every day that he went out to the track. Alice Clapham was getting on him, and he was starting to get a little naughty at that point in his career, and we just were hoping we could get him back to the barn in one piece because he was so full of himself.
And what is that experience like in the Dubai World Cup night? Talk about pomp and circumstance and pageantry. Had you been there previously, and what's it like when you're going with a horse like that who wins that big race?
Yeah, I mean, he was kind of the now horse. Sheikh Mohammed got involved with him, so there was that dimension as well. He had the new Australian partners, so there was, a certain amount of pressure. I would say that was a pretty high pressure week, and just knowing the horse was doing so well, I was just so anxious. My biggest anxiety was how Joel was going to ride him because he hadn't ridden him that well at Gulfstream in the prep race, and he was beaten that day. And I just was so nervous that he was going to, let the horse run his race. It was on the synthetic, which was not a surface that everybody was that familiar with over there. We only got to run on it once a year. So I just was really anxious that things went well on the night because I knew how well the horse was doing.
He is one of the great horses that we've had a chance to see and be around, and we were very lucky that you guys got to share him with us for even longer. Couple more horses I wanted to mention. Main Sequence, a horse who comes over to you and then right away at the highest levels, winning the Grade 1 United Nations and the Sword Dancer, and you go right into the Breeders' Cup Turf Sprint. I think he wins his first 5 races for you. What did you know about him when he came into your barn? And tell us a little bit about him.
Yeah, I mean, I'd gotten to know David Lanigan a little bit in England. We'd stayed with him at Animal Kingdom when we'd gone over there. So we'd stayed in his yard. So I did know David quite well. And, when we trained, we both trained for Flaxman for Maria Niarchos. And, when you train for people like that, it's kind of a team, right? You expect to move horses around. We work together. So the decision, he ran well in the Derby in England. I think he was third. So he came to us with good credentials, but he'd just been a little disappointing. He'd been a little awkward about coming out of the gate for David. So we worked on that a lot. And he was just a really talented horse. He was another horse, though, that really needed a clever ride. Rajiv figured him out very quickly, and he just needed a perfect ride in order to get to the wire right on the money.
Another one of the 4 Breeders' Cup wins that you've had. Ring Weekend was a really good horse for a long period of time. Another horse who showed us he could run on some different surfaces as well. I think the highlight for him was probably that Kilrow. That was such a good effort at Santa Anita. What can you tell us about him?
Yeah, no doubt. I mean, he won the Tampa Derby, I believe I'm right in saying. Daniel Centeno rode him.
Yep.
So, there was immediately some hype about that. We always thought he was a grass horse. He was just a really hard-knocking horse. He was quite difficult in the morning. He had a little bit of a mean streak in him, so we had to be careful about that. But just a really cool horse, just a very consistent performer.
And then one of my personal favorites, and I say this as someone who grew up in Temple City. My mom went to Temple City High School with Bob Feld, who I think named Miss Temple City. It was a really neat mare, and she took you to Royal Ascot a couple times, and she ran some really good races over there.
She did. I mean, she ran huge over there, and ran some really big races against the boys over here. Bob always kind of jokes with me that he's got another crazy idea, and I don't think I would have considered running her against the boys, but he made the right call, and she was very competitive. She was a really top mare.
Graham, you have a big operation over at Fairhill. Talk to us about how that started, and what is your setup like over there? It seems like you're really happy and you're very comfortable and content with how things are set up.
Yeah, I mean, look, we started off at Laurel, as I said. When I first took over the horse from Bernie, one of the owners asked me to go to Laurel, which served us well for the beginning. We then started moving up to Delaware because as we got bigger, we needed to spread out a little bit. And that's how I became connected with Fair Hill. When we were at Delaware, we heard about Fair Hill and I was aware of it. I will say back then it was not fashionable to train at a training center. When you got started in racing as a trainer, you needed to be on the racetrack because nobody knew who you were if you weren't on the racetrack. But it was around that time, Michael Dickinson was becoming very well known, obviously with his Breeders' Cup success. And we started renting stalls at Fair Hill and eventually bought a barn there. And for me, it's just been a game changer. I mean, for quality of life, for the life of the animals, for what you're able to do with the horses, it just gives you so many more options. The only drawback is we have to ship every time we run. And you'll see with our horses, they move around a lot. It always amuses me when I see comments that a certain horse is running at the sixth different track in 6 races. I mean, I don't even really think about it. It's just what we do. But it is different. But Fair Hill's been so good for us. And when I look at it, Michael Metz had Barbaro there, who was a Kentucky Derby winner. We had Animal Kingdom. I mean, there've been some really top horses come out of Fair Hill, and it's been great for me. I live a mile down the road, so I couldn't be luckier. And it's hard for me to leave, to be honest. I'm very much in my comfort zone there, and when we start traveling to other racetracks, I end up doing things that I'm not particularly accustomed to, like at Del Mar this week, for example.
Where, from a location standpoint, how far are you from Laurel and then from like some of the New York tracks at Fair Hill?
Yeah, so we're about an hour and a half to Laurel, hour to Pimlico, hour and a bit to Philadelphia Park, 2 hours to Monmouth. 3 or 4 hours to New York, depending on the traffic. We have to, when we go to New York to Belmont, we have to leave really early in the morning, first thing. So we have access to so many tracks. 10 hours to Kentucky, 10 hours to Woodbine, but anything within 10 hours is very much in our wheelhouse.
How many horses do you have currently? We've seen that number kind of change through the years. Is there a number that you feel most comfortable with? And when you were younger, were you shooting for a little bit more? Now you're looking for a little less. What are you shooting for? Or like, how do you kind of let it, the owners speak to you and bring the horses to you?
Yeah, I mean, 4 or 5 years ago, we had 2 barns at Fair Hill, which allowed us to have about 120 horses at Fair Hill. We made the decision, my wife and I, that we would try to cut back, and maybe focus a little more on quality than quantity. The drawback of having that many horses is the payroll is just, any trainer will tell you, the payroll is so difficult. And you end up, still only 20% of your horses might be, really good quality horses when you have that many. So, we made the decision to cut back to 1 barn. So we have 70 stalls at Fair Hill. And then I always have a group on the road with Alice Clapham, my assistant, whether it's Saratoga or Keeneland. We keep a little group at Delaware. And obviously in the winter now, we split up. We just brought our first horses to Palm Meadows this afternoon. So, I would say our number is around 100. It sort of fluctuates around there.
You've been someone who's had really good success on synthetic surfaces. We were just talking about some of the really nice horses you've had win big races there. How do you feel about synthetic surfaces from a training standpoint overall? Seemed like about a decade ago, we were kind of moving in that direction where a lot of tracks were going to go synthetic, and then it kind of flipped and we went back to the dirt.
Yeah, I mean, we just replaced our synthetic at Fair Hill. I train all my turf horses on synthetic. I mean, that's what we've done since I can remember. So for me, it's an incredibly useful tool. I'm going to be very intrigued to see how it goes in New York. I think it was a no-brainer for them to put in a synthetic. I think, when races come off the grass, you only lose a small portion of the field when races are switched to the synthetic, because most turf horses handle synthetic. And not only that, but it also protects your turf course. I mean, some of these turf courses get so beaten up by the end of the year. For me, I'd almost rather run in a synthetic than a beaten up turf course. So I think it's hugely helpful. I think it's going to be very helpful in New York. And for me as a training tool, I find it very helpful.
You are someone who's run a very clean operation through the years. We haven't seen lots of positives and suspensions for you. I wanted to ask your thoughts about HISA, the new Horse Racing Integrity and Safety Act, and it's been up for a couple years now. What do you think about the impact that that's had? Positive, negative? Have you noticed it? Share a little bit of your thoughts on that.
Yeah, look, I'm a big supporter of it. I was originally on one of the trainer committees, and I appreciate that we were able to get so involved and give so much feedback. It's not perfect. I think that there's been some growing pains, but people have to remember that the reason we got here is because we just hadn't had a governing body over horse racing for so long that we were really kind of a rudderless ship. Every state had different rules. Particularly for us from Fair Hill, every time we shipped to a different state, it was very complicated. And while it's still not perfect, I think they are trying to grow. I have my frustrations with it, but I think we're far better off with it than we are without it.
Okay, now we got through a lot of the hard stuff. Now we're going to ask you some fun, quick hits to finish up here. If you weren't a trainer for a living, what do you think you might be doing?
Oh boy, that's a very good question. I have no idea. I grew up with horse racing. It's all I ever wanted to do. I often think what I might do in my retirement. At one point, when I was at school, I'd considered being an auctioneer. I took one of those tests and it suggested that maybe I should be an auctioneer, but I really have no clue what I would do.
When you're not at the track, what are you and your wife or your family doing? Any hobbies that you could share with us?
Yeah, we're not big on hobbies. I'm trying to pick up golf. I live in a golf community now in Florida, so I'm determined to pick up golf. I've never been one to really get into it, but I'm trying. We like to travel. I mean, if we get an opportunity, we travel. We travel a lot with the horses, and that's, horses really are our life, our passion. We're pretty boring outside horse racing. We don't have a lot of interests.
Any movies or TV shows that you guys are currently into?
I'm anxious to watch the second part of Landman. I really enjoyed the first one. My wife is watching Suits, which is very unusual for us to watch something different, but she's kind of gotten into it, and in her free time, she's been watching that when we travel. I've never watched it.
It's a good one. I endorse it with that. Yeah. How about music? What's on your playlist? Are you listening in the mornings when you're out of the track? Do you have music in or on the way to and from tracks?
Yeah, I'm a Coldplay fan. Love Coldplay. Been to see them quite a lot in concert. I have a playlist. I have to listen to some of my son's playlist now, but he actually has pretty good taste. He likes a lot of the 80s, 90s music. So ELO, always been a big fan of ELO.
How about sports other than horse racing? Or any sports or any teams that you follow?
Yeah, I mean, I follow the Chiefs because I was lucky enough to meet Andy Reid when he was in Philadelphia. When I had Animal Kingdom, he came out and watched him train a few times. I went into Philadelphia and watched the team train and spent some time with him. I'm a huge fan of his. I think he's a remarkable person, human being. And, the Chiefs are, how can you not enjoy watching the Chiefs? They're so exciting to watch over the last 4 or 5 years. So yeah, I do that. I'm a big fantasy football guy. One of my owners got me into it, so I'm a little obsessed about fantasy football. I love soccer. I follow it. I love the World Cup. I don't follow it religiously every weekend, but I do love the World Cup. I think it's an amazing event.
We were talking about traveling around the world to different tracks. What are some of your favorite tracks that you've had a chance to run at or visit around the world?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of boring. Ascot, that's just such an amazing place. It's almost like a shrine, really. I grew up in Newmarket, so I have great memories of going racing in Newmarket. We lived 6 miles outside of Newmarket when I was a kid till I was 16. So my dad took me to the Jocks Room to get Steve Corson to sign his autobiography. I mean, that was kind of in my blood when I was growing up. Santa Anita, I think, is the most beautiful track, and I love Keeneland.
After a big winning day, What's a celebration like meal for you, or a drink? You have a favorite drink, favorite meal that you have after a good day?
Yeah, my parents always joke with me, if we have a double, they'll say, "Are you having Chinese tonight?" I don't really know where that came from, but we do like to celebrate. Nothing better than celebrating with friends at Fair Hill.
Um, One thing I love about you too, you will be very outspoken on social media. You're never a phony person. We know what you think, whether it be about horse racing or other things. Is that something you have a fun time with, going back and forth with folks on social media?
Yeah, I struggle with it a little bit. I do have strong opinions of what's going on in the world, and I don't know, extraordinary amount of people follow me on Twitter. I don't know why they feel like following me, but I have a voice and I feel like using it, and I feel pretty strongly about it, and I worry about being so outspoken sometimes, but I have a voice, and I think it's important that you use your voice. I blame Mark Hennig. He got me on Twitter originally, and it's a little bit of an obsession, but I have definitely tried to step away from it. But I do think Twitter works really well with horse racing. I mean, I use Twitter to see what's going on at the races all the time, even just to see scratches. It's a very useful tool for horse racing, regardless of my own personal beliefs.
Well, we appreciate always you standing up for what you think is right, and that's what it's all about in the world. You and your wife have been on a lot of different boards, involved with a lot of different organizations. Are there any either aftercare organizations or any type of fundraising that you're doing right now? Any places that you want to mention or plug?
Yeah, I mean, my wife she's involved with DRF, and she set up this Real Rider Cup 5 or 6 years ago, which has just been phenomenal. People sign up, and they have to raise, I believe it's $1,000 to compete, and they wear a jockey's silks for an owner that supports them, and they compete in a show jumping ring, and they have teams. And this year, we actually did it at the 5-star at Fair Hill, which really sort of put it on the next level, if you like, because there was a lot of attention. And she's raised close to $1 million, I believe, and I think it's phenomenal.
It's incredible.
The work she's done. She feels very passionate about it and is very dedicated about it. So, any of the organizations are incredibly important. But follow the Real Rider Cup. It's something that my wife has created herself, and it's been hugely successful. And it's so important that we take care of retired racehorses, and we do a much better job than we did, say, 10 years ago. I think we've come a long way, but there's still so much room to do more. We need to do more. It's what the industry needs.
Many people see your name in the past performances and the programs, but they probably don't know a whole lot about you. What's something that you think most people don't know about Graham Motion?
Probably I'm superstitious. I think trainers are always anxious, but people probably know that about horse trainers. I don't know. I think training horses is such an involvement. You never really walk away from it. And I think sometimes people might think you're not friendly at the races or something, but when we're at the races, we're kind of full on working, and we have a lot on our minds. And I think sometimes people don't appreciate that. They think that it's all, about the sport and about the fun, but there's a lot that goes on, and it's all consuming training horses. It has to be. In order to be successful, you have to be.
And we're very lucky because we know you're a busy man, and you gave us about an hour of your time here to come and chat with us and go through your entire career. Graham, thank you so much. This is the first time I've had a chance to talk with you, and it was an absolute pleasure for me. And we wish you the best of luck, and we appreciate your time.
Thanks for having me. Great to do it.
Thanks so much for tuning in to another episode of the Off the Track Podcast. Make sure to subscribe to the podcast anywhere that you get yours. We're available on Amazon, Audible, Spotify, and on YouTube. See you next week with another very special guest.